Hello, and welcome to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about gunfighting the right way, with Judeo-Christian values and real-world first-hand experience. Gonna do a quick preamble to this, because there's a lot of technical stuff in this episode. There are a lot of rabbit holes we could have gone down. What about the 55 grain versus the 62 versus the 77 grain? And what about the 147s? And what about 300 blackout? And what about when you put a 9mm in a 16 or a 20-inch barrel? So for this, I try to keep it simple and talk about similar size and weight and footprint platforms and these short ARs, these short-barreled ARs. I'm talking smaller 9mm versus short ARs in 5.56. Something like a SIG Scorpion or an HK MP or SP5, something in that kind of size platform versus a short barreled AR, whether it be an SBR or an AR pistol. So know that going into this.
I am your host, Michael Melito. First and foremost, I am a Christian, a servant of God, a follower of Jesus Christ. God has blessed me to do many things in life. Marine Corps combat veteran, also served in the U.S. Army, full-time and part-time National Guard, was an urban warfare instructor for the Marine Corps, also law enforcement veteran, worked LAPD, worked with the feds, did some regular assignments and some more specialized assignments, also been a private contractor, state rifle and pistol champion several times over in different states, and West Coast regional rifle champion. Won more shooting competitions than I can remember. Been blessed to be a professional big game hunter and guide, and hunted since my youth all over this beautiful country. That's a short abbreviated version of the bio, kind of in a nutshell. Now let's get into what we're going to talk about today. I've been doing some this cartridge versus that cartridge, this idea, and I'm going to run with it. We'll see how it goes. And this is going to be the P.C.C. pistol caliber carbine versus the short-barreled AR. Now, when I say short-barreled AR, for not legality purposes, legality is very different, but for practical purposes, doesn't matter if it's an SBR, right, a legit stamped SBR, or a AR pistol, air quotes, with a pistol brace. If you're shooting the same round out of an identical barrel, the velocity, the energy on the target makes zero difference whether it's got a stock on the back or a pistol grip. Can we all agree on that? So when I say AR pistol or SBR, just know that what matters for this discussion is really going to be, if we're talking about ballistic effectiveness, how good that round is out of that barrel, not legalities. Legalities aside, yes, as far as legalities go, SBRs are a different and separate thing per the ATF than a pistol, an AR pistol. Right, so just realize that. You know what I'm saying there. But we're going to talk about not the difference in legalities, but the difference in effectiveness. What's the difference? P.C.C. pistol caliber carbine versus a short-barreled AR. Right? When it comes down to the rubber meeting the road, what's the practical differences? Which one's better? What's the good and the bad and the hype? And when I say pistol caliber carbines, for this I'm talking more of the tactical. As much as I like the lever action 357s, 44 Magnums, they're great utilitarian guns, but we're going to table that for today. We're talking about modern semi-auto pistol caliber carbines. And whether that be a dedicated platform like the H&K SP5 or its clones, or like the CZ Scorpion, which has become popular in recent times, or we're talking about an AR with a dedicated lower or a conversion kit to make it a pistol caliber carbine. But that's the thing we're talking about today when I say pistol caliber carbines. And when I say short-barreled ARs, I'm talking about pistols or SBRs with a much less than traditional barrel length, 12 inches and down, probably, between the 10 and 12 inch mark. And why not go shorter than that, I'll probably get into. With that, let us talk about Let's be circumspect and consider the pistol caliber carbine. Now, I've done other episodes on the P.C.C. You can look those up. But what are the advantages? Okay. Number one, they're super cool, and you can shoot them super fast, so you look really cool on Instagram. Boom. Super cool. That seems to be what a lot of things are predicated on nowadays. Now, if we look at that from a martial aspect, there is some real advantages. You can shoot them really fast. Look at the speeds. Go look up a champion P.C.C. shooter in like USPSA. They are crazy fast. It is, drag racing with those kind of guns. It is crazy fast, and I love competition shooting. So what's the martial application? You can shoot them really fast, right? They're a much heavier gun than, let's say, a SIG M17 or a Glock 17 in a 9mm. The much bigger, heavier gun with a lot more to hold on to. Therefore, there's less felt recoil, and you can shoot them faster. You can run them fast. Also, getting into this, why they're common in USPSA and stuff nowadays, you can shoot them on most pistol ranges because you're basically shooting, you are shooting pistol ammunition. So that might give you a lot more opportunity to shoot depending on where you're at than some rifles. So it's a martial advantage. It's a real world rubber meets the road advantage. Also, if we're comparing it to like an AR of the same barrel length, it's going to be quieter. Not quiet, not silent, but it's going to be quieter, right? It's going to be. That's just a reality. And we could get off in the weeds on all kinds of calibers, but for this we're going to talk about the 9mm, and we're going to talk about the 5.56/223, right? That's what we're going to talk about for today. We're not going to get off in the weeds about what about 45 ACP P.C.C.s and what about 300 Blackout short-barreled ARs. Like, I agree there are some advantages and disadvantages there, but to keep this a podcast-length episode, that's what we're talking about. Going back to the P.C.C. and 9mm. So another real advantage is they are cheaper to shoot in general, right? 9mm is one of the most affordable and economic defensive rounds. Right? It is, right? So there's that. So there is an advantage there, I do believe. Economy of scale, for rifle rounds, centerfire rifle rounds, 5.56 is one of the most affordable just because of economy of scale. But I think we can't argue that 9mm is cheaper. So if we take that at face value, that 9mm is more affordable, you'll shoot it more. For all the reasons we stated, plus the fact that it's more economic. So would you rather have the 9mm that you can shoot, more than twice as much, or would you rather have the 223 that you can shoot a little bit less? So those are some real-world advantages to the P.C.C. Also, if you are the kind of guy that this really appeals to, you get your commonality of ammo. Just like the Wild West and days of yore, where somebody may have a pistol caliber carbine, the old school versions, and their sidearm, their 6-gun on their hip, their big iron, in the same caliber. Well, you can be a modern version of that, right? You can carry your SIG M17 or your Beretta 92 if you want to be awesome, and you can carry your pistol caliber carbine in the same guys, right? The same caliber, and even a lot of times the same mags. If you go the Glock route, there's a ton of them that take Glock mags, and Glock mags, again, economy of scale. It's not that they're better mags than other mags, but they're so common, a bunch of companies make them, they're affordable. You likely could walk into a random gun store somewhere and they're going to have Glock mags. That's a big advantage. So, and you can likely, if you care that much about this, you're probably going to tailor your setup so that you can shoot the same, not only caliber, which is important, but the same magazines. You could take a magazine off your belt, your emergency reload, and either throw it in your handgun or throw it in your P.C.C. I'm not gonna, go to the bathroom on that idea. That's not an unreal advantage. I think a lot of people make more of that than they should, and some people make less of that than they should, but I think it is a real advantage for the P.C.C. Also, here is kind of a reality. Most handguns have and I won't even say, but the vast majority of handguns have under a 6-inch barrel. Can we agree with that? Like, they have under a 6-inch barrel. Force equals mass times velocity squared. So if we gain velocity, which we will in a longer barrel, we get more energy out of that 9mm, which is already known for, having some street cred for being effective. We're giving it more energy. Okay, so that's a real advantage. Caveat: a lot of handgun rounds, a lot of 9mm loads get a lot of testing and evaluation to perform well in pistol length barrels, and they can be very finicky in just a couple of inches. You might think more velocity is always better, but it could cause that hollow point, if you're talking about defense, to expand too rapidly. And when it expands too rapidly, ironically, with the more energy, it might penetrate less. So you have to be judicious about your ammo selection. Just like you do in a carry gun, you have to be judicious in your selection in a P.C.C. Again, it may be a great and well-researched round out of a handgun, and it might not perform well at all out of your P.C.C. for reasons already stated. So consider that, but it is a reality that you will be getting in general more energy shooting that same round out of a P.C.C. than you will out of your handgun. Even if it's the same load, even if you take the same magazine, again, reload off your belt and put it in your handgun versus putting it in your P.C.C., you're going to get more power, more energy shooting it out of your P.C.C. Also, another advantage, if you're talking about these P.C.C.s, they can a lot of times, because you're dealing with a lower pressure round, be made into very simple designs. And I like simple. I do a whole other podcast called Simple Man Sermons. I like simple. I also like the song Simple Man by Leonard Skinner, but I like the version of Shinedown even more. If you care. You probably don't. It has nothing to do with P.C.C.s. But I like that song. P.C.C. can be made in a simple blowback version, right? Simple, effective, very simple to operate. Now, that's in general. Guns are individuals. You could have a simple blowback gun that's very finicky, right? As much as I love Beretta, their old little like Bobcat, Tomcat, very simple blowback guns are not known for being super reliable, especially as far as today's standards go. But in general, P.C.C.s can be made with very simple blowback technology. Basically, you have a bolt and a spring that blows back. I'm not telling you should carry a high point carbine, but they are very simple, they're very cheap to manufacture, and they are very reliable. And that, I'm not telling you to carry one again, but that illustrates the point of the simplicity that you can get with a straight blowback system. Very mechanically simple, and I like simple. So there is that real advantage. Alright, I talked about some of the virtues of the P.C.C. Let me talk about some of the advantages of the short-barreled AR. And then I'll get into the disadvantages of each, and then maybe some conclusions and thoughts at the end. Big advantages for the short-barreled AR. Okay, if you are a veteran or law enforcement or somebody, or a competition shooter that's had some legit training with an AR, the ergonomics and the manual of arms is going to be familiar. It's basically going to be identical, right? Unless you're talking about bayonet training, which is awesome. Most of the stuff that you're talking about with a short-barreled AR is going to transfer and be ubiquitous between that and your standard M16 or AR-15. So I don't want to not mention that. There's a lot of veterans out there, right? And there's a lot of people that have training. Maybe an AR is the only rifle they've ever shot. So going to the short-barreled AR, that's an advantage there. I know you can build some P.C.C.s and conversions to have the same ergonomics, but you're going to have exactly the same ergonomics pretty much, again, except for bayonet training and maybe some hand-to-hand combat stuff with the short-barreled AR. So that's an advantage. Mil-spec is a term that I'm not crazy about, but I'm going to use it here. The commonality of parts maybe is a better term. But except for like gas tubes and the length of the gas system, and maybe like the fore ends and stuff like that. But the vast majority of parts, especially parts that are going to give you problems, extractors, pins, trigger components, the parts that tend to be issues in ARs, you get that vast commonality because ARs are super common. And unless you're dealing with like a piston system or something like that, the vast majority of those parts are going to interchange. You could take the extractor out of a literal military M16 and put it in your short-barreled AR, and you should test it, but it should work. It should be compatible. And you're not getting that with a P.C.C., so that's an advantage. As good as the SIG or the CZ Scorpion is, or the HK-SP5, there's no real interchangeability of parts, I don't think, except for maybe you can put an optic off one on the other because they have the same rail. But you're probably not taking bolts out of one and putting them in the other. So that's a big advantage for the short-barreled AR. So that's a real advantage, that kind of mil-spec advantage in the short-barreled AR. And here's maybe the biggest one. You're dealing with a legit rifle round. It's a different ballpark when you're talking a pistol round versus a rifle round. You do lose some velocity. I know you gain some velocity in the pistol round going to a longer barrel, and you lose some going to a shorter barrel in the AR, but you're still talking a rifle round versus a pistol round. So just on that, there's an advantage there, and there's a big advantage there. Also, magazines. We talked about Glock magazines. They're very common. I don't think they're as common as AR pattern magazines. There's a ton of companies that make AR pattern magazines. They're not expensive. There's some that are better than others. Ironically, some of the worst ones I think are the military ones, but are the old military metal ones. The Marine Corps does use Magpul mags now, but there's a lot of really good and inexpensive magazines for ARs, probably more so than any P.C.C, even if it takes Glock mags. So you've got that going for you for these short-barreled ARs. Also, trajectory, right? That's a big advantage. If it applies to you, if it's only a home defense gun, then it probably not going to apply. But the ability to not have greater range per se, because you could shoot a P.C.C at 300 yards, but point blank range, and what that actually means is, let's say I take a U.S. PSA target. If you're familiar with that, it's got a man silhouette and it's got a square in the center of it. The square in the center of it is the area you can hit without getting points deducted, and you can picture that on a actual human and what that means. But if I aim for the center of that target, I'm going to hit somewhere in that no penalty zone. I can do that at a far greater range with a short-barreled AR than I can with a P.C.C. It's got a flatter trajectory, a much flatter trajectory. So if you expect to be able to engage targets at different distances, that makes a big difference. Again, you can shoot a P.C.C. at long distances, but you have to know drops and holdovers and things like that, and you have to be able to estimate range really well. The ability to just look at a target, whether it's at 50 yards or 250 yards, apply the fundamentals, get the whatever system you're using, whether it's the front sight post if you're using irons, or a reticle if you're using an optic, or a red dot, put that on the center of the target and apply a slow, steady press and hit the center of that target at all kinds of varying distances is a big advantage for the short-barreled AR, in my opinion. Again, if that doesn't apply to you, then it doesn't apply. But that's a real big advantage for that. Also, I mentioned a lot of the P.C.C.s are going to be straight blowback, and that's great because they're simple, but that gives you more reciprocating mass, I believe, than a common AR. Although you're dealing with and this is a generality, and not all P.C.C.s are direct blowback, but if you're dealing with a direct blowback gun, and you're talking about a rotating bolt design as in an AR, you're going to have less reciprocating mass, which means although you're shooting a more powerful projectile, the actual force coming back at the shooter and the inertia in the felt recoil may actually be less, even though you're shooting a more powerful round. So that's an advantage. So there's some real big advantages there, I think. And some of this doesn't come across very well in audio, so I'm just going to mention that. So there is that. That's a real thing. Alright, and before I get into the disadvantages that I believe for each platform, I want to talk about some real-world numbers and ballistics. Now, I went to Ballistics by the Inch, which I think has some street cred at this point for being well known and respected for honesty in their stuff. But do your own research. By the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses, a matter is established. So I looked at 2 pretty common loads, what I would consider common. I didn't say best. I didn't say it's what you should choose. I just think they're common loads in each to give us a rough idea. And the loads that I chose were 55 grain Remington UMC, which I do believe stands for Union Metallic Cartridge, if anybody cares. The 55 grain, out of the 10-inch barrel, it lists at 2616 feet per second for a calculated foot-pounds of 836. Again, 55 grain at 2616, 10-inch barrel, 836. Now, let's look at what I would consider a fairly common, and again, I didn't say best, I didn't say it's what you should be carrying on your hip or in your P.C.C., but 124 grain Federal Hydroshock. Been around a while, pretty well known. 124 grain out of a 10-inch barrel at 1211 for energy foot-pounds of 404. Again, 124 grain, 1211 out of a 10-inch barrel, total of 404. That's a difference of the first one in the short-barreled AR, 836 versus the P.C.C., 404. Now you can say, what about 147s? What about 12-inch barrels? What about 77 grain? What about if, it's 5,000 feet of elevation and I ate an energy drink that day and I'm hopping on 1 foot? I'm being sarcastic, but there's a lot of variables. I just chose, and I didn't cherry pick. I didn't look at a bunch of different ones and pick what I thought was best. I found what I thought was the most common load listed there for 55 grain, AR load, and a very common, what I would consider the most common of the listings, 9mm load. You're looking at more than double the energy. Now, energy does not mean more effective. I don't think that if you necessarily double the energy of something, you double its effectiveness, or that it has double the stopping power or man stopping ability or whatever you want to say. I don't think that, but you can't deny the numbers. They're not even close. It's more than double with the short-barreled AR. Now, you do lose over a standard carbine or a standard rifle. You do lose quite a bit of velocity, but you're still dealing with a lot more power with the short-barreled AR. So those are some real, and again, you shoot the same thing out of a 10-inch barrel. It could differ from manufacturer to manufacturer. It could differ on the day, the temperature, the elevation. I was only half joking about that. Like, that stuff makes a difference, but I don't think you're going to close that gap. It's more than double. So that's a real thing. We're talking about real power. With that, let's roll into some of the things I perceive as disadvantages for the P.C.C. Okay, non-commonality of parts, right? So the 6 Scorpion, good platform. Not super common as far as total guns sold, especially not compared to an AR. Probably the most long-lived and very successful, the HK MP5 or civilian SP5. Still, as far as total number sold compared to ARs, not a lot. So if you need a part for that, I don't know how likely it is to find. It's kind of like the advantage of or disadvantage of driving a fancy car. If you're driving through the rural backwoods of Idaho in an F-150 and you need, let's say, a fuel filter or a mass airflow sensor from the nearest town, you're a lot more likely to find that in, let's say, Riggins, Idaho, than you are if you were driving a Ferrari. As cool as it would be to drive on back paved roads in Idaho in a Ferrari, if you need a mass airflow sensor, I don't think you're going to be finding one. So just the disadvantage there is there's really no standard. So there's not going to be a lot of, if any, parts commonality. So there's that disadvantage. A big disadvantage we talked about is power. You're giving up a lot of power. You're gaining a little bit of velocity, but you're still talking about a long gun, if we can use that term, a fairly big, hefty gun in a pistol caliber. So you're getting a lot more weight over a pistol, and you're getting more shootability, to be fair, but you're getting a lot more weight for a little bit more velocity. If we look at power, it's less. Like, you can't argue with that. You might argue that a 147 grain in a PCC is more effective than whatever load that you cherry pick out of an AR, but there's no denying it's less powerful. And if we say, for argument's sake, a PCC and a short-barreled AR are about the same weight, and this is going to vary wildly, but you're giving up power. And if you look at power to weight ratio, if you look at what's I would consider very common, a 115 grain loading on the light end for a 9mm, and you look at what's a common light loading of 55 grain in a 223 or 556, you're literally talking about double the weight of the projectile. And the projectile is the heaviest part of that round. Now, you get a little bit more brass in an AR cartridge, but brass doesn't weigh nearly as much. I don't think it's twice as heavy, but if you're talking power to weight ratio, the PCC loses that. Just, it does. Also, if you're talking about varying distances, and again, I know you can shoot long distance with a PCC, and PCCs can be very accurate, but there's a difference in being able to shoot on a static range and hit a small steel plate at 300 yards when you have time and you're shooting off a bench, you know you're dope, and you know the distance, versus you're sprinting, literally maybe for your life taking incoming rounds, and you see a target shooting at you and you have to return fire. Are you going to be able to calculate your bullet drop at that distance in that amount of time? We're talking, this is gunfighter life, right? This is not plinkster life. This is gunfighter life. So in that kind of martial application, the ability to have a long point blank range, you lose that. That's a disadvantage in the PCC. Again, you can shoot them farther, but you're dealing with a lot more drop. You're not just going to be able to point and click at the vast array of distances you can with a short-barreled AR. You're talking, again, if we use those numbers of 55 grain at 26.16 versus a 124 at 12.11, that's a vastly different trajectory. And we just have to admit that, I think. I'm not saying that you should even worry about that. That may not apply to you. If this is for home defense, that's kind of a moot point. If you live in, Southern California, somewhere in the greater Swiss cheese of Los Angeles, right? Whether it's Los Angeles or Santa Monica or Culver City, somewhere in that array, long shots may not be a thing for you. So, but if you are talking about you don't know what distance the encounter is going to be in, it could be anywhere from, again, 0 to several hundred yards. I think that's a disadvantage for the PCC. All right. Now, let's talk about some disadvantages for the short-barreled AR. They are loud. Now, I have shot short-barreled ARs and I have thrown flashbangs. It is not a flashbang. Flashbangs are crazy loud and disruptive. But it's a lot more towards that end of the spectrum than a PCC. Especially, it's one thing if you're shooting them outside on a range with Ear Pro, but if you talk about like sending a round out of the barrel inside a bathroom inside, which is not an uncommon place for people to hide in CQB type environments, it's loud. It's not only loud as far as decibels go, it's disruptive in that you get a lot of unburnt powder and concussion coming out of that barrel. And that really may disrupt your OODA loop, even if you take care of that adversary in that bathroom. What if there's other people in that house and you're very disoriented because of the blast and concussion and noise from letting rounds go inside a bathroom with that short-barreled AR? And even not in a bathroom, just inside in general, they are loud. Go, if you shoot at an indoor range, go stand next to somebody, even with your Ear Pro on, in an indoor range, which is a pretty big indoor environment, and listen to them set rounds down range with a short-barreled AR. They are loud. They have quite a big concussion. With the PCC, you're gaining barrel over your normal, regular pistol, and you're burning a lot more of that powder. I don't know what percentages are. You're not burning all the powder, but you're burning a lot more powder before that leaves the barrel of a PCC than the amount of unburnt powder in a short-barreled AR. There's going to be a lot of unburnt powder and concussion that goes along with it, and flash if you're shooting at night. So that's a big disadvantage for the short-barreled AR. Here's a big disadvantage. You are losing power. I said with the 9mm, you're going to be gaining power over your common pistol in general. You're going to be losing power in general because most of these rounds are designed for 20-inch barrels and then later 16-inch barrels. But if you're talking about, and I'm just picking 10, 11.5, 12.5, you're losing even more velocity, right? You're losing power. And I would never, in general, advise you, unless you have a specific reason, like penetration, to carry a full metal jacket round or a light armor piercing round for personal defense. I would advise you to shoot a hollow point or expanding round, something designed for that purpose. The military in general carries full metal jackets because of the Hague Convention, not the Geneva Convention, but the Hague Convention. But if that doesn't apply to you, use what's effective. And a lot of these hollow point rounds are velocity based, right? If you drop your hollow point down nose first on a table, it's not going to expand. It needs a certain amount of velocity, and you're going well below. I shouldn't say well below. You are going below the threshold that most of those loads were designed for, unless it was specifically designed for a short barrel. So I said you had to be judicious in your selection of defensive ammo for a P.C.C. because it may overexpand. You got to be, I think, as much or more judicious with your selection because you're losing velocity, and your rounds may not only turn into an FMJ as far as practicality goes. I mean, because if they're not expanding, they might be a hollow point, meaning they have a hollow point, but if they don't expand, they're not doing what a hollow point is designed to do. So you're not only going to full metal jacket territory, but slow full metal jacket territory. So that's a big disadvantage there. Also, we talk about mil spec, and that has its advantages as far as parts go, but here's the big disadvantage in short-barreled ARs. Those operating systems that, let's admit, as when they first came out, were not the most reliable, but over the years and decades, they've been refined to be reliable with things like M4 feed ramps and gas systems and things being worked out, and a lot of engineering and a lot of research and development going into those systems. Those systems are, in general, the vast majority designed for 20-inch and 16-inch barrels. So you're going into a lot less charted, not uncharted, but a lot less charted territory when you go to a 10.5, 11.5, 12.5. You know, the buffer system and the buffer weight and the gas tube and the barrel gas port diameter, all these little things work together as a system, and they're much more tested and researched in a 16 and a 20-inch system, whether it's a rifle length gas system or a carbine length or a mid length. And if you go outside those parameters with a short-barreled AR, you really, I think, you should always test your systems. Always test your kit, your gear to make sure, because I don't care if it's a Daniel Defense and a Glock 17, either one of those models that are very well known could have issues. But when you're going outside the parameters, you really got to do your due diligence as far as testing your loads and testing that gun to make sure it's reliable. Not that somebody else's on YouTube was reliable, but that yours, fired by you with your ammunition and your magazines, is reliable. And I think you should always test that, but I think to feel comfortable, I would have to test it a lot more if I'm going outside those parameters. And you are when you're going to short-barreled ARs. So that's a big disadvantage. So which one of these is better? Again, if you're talking about shooting really fast and having fun on a pistol range, the P.C.C. is your jam. If you're talking about ammo and magazine compatibility, the P.C.C. is your jam. If you're talking about all kinds of varying distances, the short-barreled AR is going to be your thing. If you're talking about more power, the short-barreled AR. But I thought about how to put this. If I could only have one, and you're asking me personally right now, which gun would I want versus the other guy who doesn't get a say to go into this gunfight, I would choose the short-barreled AR. I would want to test it and run it and do all the things I talked about, but I want the short-barreled AR over the P.C.C. If I have a gun of the same weight and same everything else, I'm going to go for that. Look at the lethality and effectiveness of rifles versus pistols. And I know you're skewing those lines a little bit, but you're still talking about a lot more power. And if I get a good first round hit on target, that gives me a much higher chance to get a fast second, third round hit on target, and for those to be debilitating. And I think that's what's going to be important. And I would choose the short-barreled AR over a P.C.C. If there's no other caveats, if there's just like which one is the most effective tool for all-around things. Again, no other caveats. I think the short-barreled AR. That's my opinion. I'm not saying there's no room. I'm not saying that P.C.C.s are stupid. I'm not saying there's no reason for them. There's a lot of good reasons for them, which I think we stated. But if you're talking about platform versus platform effectiveness, I think I would go with the short-barreled AR. Feel free to disagree. Feel free to contact me for constructive criticism or any comments or anything at goodshepherdtraining.com. Again, goodshepherdtraining.com. I did choose one on here, but I try to be as unbiased and fair as I can. I hope you appreciate that. I'm not getting any kickbacks from gun companies, from ammo companies, I think sadly a lot of things, a lot of videos, a lot of shows and stuff have just become like commercials for products. And this podcast is not that. And if you appreciate that, I hope you'll consider becoming a patron. Patrons get a lot of cool insider content, and they really bless me because I get to interact with them a lot more. And that's a blessing to me, and I appreciate that. And I am truly humbled. If you're just a listener, I'm truly humbled that you give me your time. And if you're a patron, I am very thankful that you support the podcast. It is a great blessing.
Gunfighters, if you like this content, if you appreciate that it's not just some gun commercial telling you to buy the next hot P.C.C. or Mark whatever and it's going to make you John Wick and a half plus 50%. If you like good, honest content, remember old days PBS, supported by viewers like you. If you want to be a part of this podcast, an active participant, I would be very humbled if you consider going to Patreon. There is a giveaway this month in the year of our Lord, January 2023. A good SOG bushcraft fixed blade knife and a bailout bag where you could put some of the spare mags and maybe a full-size fighting handgun for one of these setups we talked about today at the ready in your vehicle or whatever you want. Where there's a giveaway going on, mostly I want you to support because you like the content. And although we're shaped by our experience, our training, our lives, I try and be fair and unbiased in this. By doing that, I don't want to take bribes from some corporate sponsor, gun company or whatever. I've refused sponsors. I want this to be an honest podcast. If you want to support something like that, consider again becoming a patron. There'll be a link in the show notes. Anyway, with that, I want to leave you with the tactical verse of the day. God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Therefore, submit to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Tactical tip of the day. 20-round AR mags. And I know some people are going to think that's an abomination. Like, more is always better. But when I've run these, as a professional, a lot of times be in a covert or semi-covert kind of environment where these were in bags. You want them in a sleek profile that didn't scream, hey, there's a rifle inside me. That probably applies to a lot more civilians than people doing it professionally. That was kind of a unique situation. But with the 20-round mags, you can put it inside a much smaller footprint bag because it doesn't really stick out with the 20-round mag any more than the pistol grip does. So the bag's got to be at least that long anyway. Would you rather be able to grab and go in a short-barreled AR out of a pack with a loaded 20-round mag, or have to grab it out of the bag and load a 30-round mag? Think about that. Think about most situations, and I'm not saying you shouldn't be allowed to own 30-round or 40 rounds or 150-round magazines or a belt fed if you want. But think about it practically. The kind of situations that are probable, is a 20-round mag, if you have decent marksmanship, not going to solve that problem. So if you're looking at carrying one of these in a bag, you might want to consider 20-round mags. Lancer, Magpul, and Amend 2 all make good 20-round mags. Magpul is kind of the standard. I like Amend 2. I have no problem with Lancer mags. I just haven't run them as much. But they all make 20-round mags, and least we forget the AR was originally designed, I believe, for 20-round mags. Also, they have an advantage if you're running a war belt, which again I've done professionally. You can have them stowed in your war belt, still be able to bend over and move around quite a bit. And you can, instead of having to index them like a beer can, which is common vernacular for tactical training and military and stuff, circles with a 30-round mag, I can index them the exact same way as I can a pistol mag and insert them pretty much the same way. So continuity of training there. You know, if I'm doing reloads off a chest rig, it doesn't really matter because I'm doing a whole different manual of arms anyway. But if I'm going off a war belt, I go to my belt, I index a mag a certain way, and I can do that the same way. I run a couple pistol mags, a couple rifle mags, and I can grab them and index them. That same grip, insert them. Manual of arms, again, very similar. So, a little tactical tip there. Don't think that you always have to have 30-round mags. They are really good for some things. Again, if I'm running a chest rig, yeah, 30-round mags. If I got a bandolier, got no issue throwing 30-round mags in there. But if I'm doing some of those other things, 20-round mags are nice. I think that's kind of the sweet spot because the pistol grip already sticks down that far anyway, so you're not really adding to the footprint of the gun. Anyway, men, with that, be strong, prove yourself a man, and have a blessed day.